It's in the lab time, and yes, we are back. It's been a long, long time. I think July, John. We had that break. We always do this every year. We don't do in the lab during training camp because it's too crazy and there's too much going on. And I know that sounds like weird, like, hey, you guys work for a football team and talk about a football team, but you should be talking about a football team during training camp. Like, it's not how we do it, right, John?
Well, we do talk about the team. We talk about the team a lot. So doing it in a lab gets a little bit tough, and especially when we have 10 days in Ohio. We're all over the place, and then games, and it's kind of nuts. So it's in a sense good to get away, but then it's also great to come back and get in the lab going again. So it's all good, man. I hope you're doing well.
I am. One thing I want to address here right off the top, I think long term, this training camp, you're never able to really quantify things like this, but I think it's going to help this team out. This training camp, weather-wise, was the mildest one for the Texans that was not at the Greenbrier, which was 2017 and 2018. But think about it. Essentially, for the first 2 weeks of training camp, the Texans were not frying in the 100-degree heat and humidity. It was rainy. It was cool. It was windy, relatively cool, relatively speaking. Then they go to Ohio, which was warm, but not bad, not like this. So they only had about a week or two in the hardcore heat. Certainly, that'll pay some dividends. Don't you think later on, John? Guys being a little bit fresher than normal?
I would hope so. I mean, you also started camp earlier, a week earlier than you're used to. So you kind of counterbalance having some cooler temperatures at the beginning of training camp with having some scorching temperatures at the end of training camp. There were a couple of days, man, where I was like, I would look at my watch, my phone, and go, it's 10:30. Oh, good God, we have an hour left, or we have 45 minutes left. I can only imagine what they were going through. So there are a couple of days that were pretty rough, but I think for the most part, that whatever that system, dome, whatever it was that was kind of camped out, that had us checking the radar, like, okay, are we going to have to go inside today, was actually a godsend, because we really only had one day that I remember that was really, really rainy during practice. Everything else, there might be some rain before, there might be some rain after, but there wasn't during. And so that allowed them to get some work in temperatures that were pretty good. Those days that hit hard after we got back from Ohio, man, those are some tough days. But in Ohio, like you said, it was relatively nice. It was kind of gray and overcast, and I think it maybe topped out at 82, 83. So it was great. Now, the field was saturated. So by the second day, it was almost like muddy conditions. But then we went to the game field, which is turf, and so they were able to get some work in there. But I think overall, the temperature being relatively under control was good. And in a sense, I don't know the right way of saying this. I know D'Amico's talked about, that's part of the mental toughness for this team is that. The flip side of that is, after you played the Steelers, and the Steelers night in Pittsburgh was gorgeous. I mean, it was 83. It was nice. I mean, it was just pleasant. I mean, really pleasant. Then you played the Giants, and you played the Rams. You played them at NRG Stadium, although it was listed as an outdoor game. It was indoor. Then you're going to play at Indy inside. You're going to play at home Bears inside. Then you're going to play at Minnesota inside. Then you're going to play Jags, Bills inside. So you don't go outside till October 13th. So it wasn't as if you had to be totally acclimated to the heat, because you really weren't going to play in it until you go to New England and Green Bay back-to-back in October. And traditionally, those places in October are relatively reasonable.
You should be hitting the leaves. You should be hitting the leaves in New England at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you really weren't going to get hit with this just scorching temperatures, or even have the opportunity. I mean, we played at New England in 2017, week 3. Now, that was pretty spicy that day. That was week 3. Yeah. Now you're 3 weeks later in October, and that was rare. So you really didn't need to be out in the hot temperature. So it actually worked out for you in some sense, because you don't play any road games outside. You just gotta, at this point, figure out how Sunday night is going to be a Sunday night game, the first one. So hopefully things can happen and the roof get fixed, and it'll be all indoor for the rest of the way. But either way, I think it worked out, and I'm curious to see how that plays out going forward, whether that plays a role or not. The fact that there wasn't as much taken out of these guys having to go in 95-degree temperatures for 3, 4, 5 days in a row.
Okay, roster trim down just happened. Let's hit a few points on that. Technically, there are no true fullbacks on the roster.
Yeah.
So do you see more of, and we've kind of heard guys allude to this, more of the 3 wide sets, 4 wide sets, more 2 tight end? I mean, what are you seeing without a true quote unquote tight end on the roster? Now, they'll use some tight ends as fullbacks. They'll line them up in the backfield from time to time. British Brooks, the rookie out of North Carolina, he's got some thunder to him. Maybe he plays some fullback, get some reps there. But what do you make of that? Not having a true tight end on the roster right now, not having a true fullback on the roster right now, with regards to this offense and where we think it might be headed, alignment wise, formation wise, all that stuff.
I'm not being cheeky about this, but I don't know that much changes. If I'm being honest. I mean, I think they'll do a number of the same things they did. You know, there were times last year where Dalton Schultz lined up at fullback. You know, Kate Stover is physical. He can be that fullback. I mean, he's not scared for contact. Now,
I was going to say it gives you a chance to put him on the field and not necessarily at the tight end spot. Yeah,
that's right. And then British Brooks, I mean, we saw in that preseason game when he did line up at fullback, he ain't scared to light somebody up. And he's kind of more of a fullback body anyways. Yeah. And it's funny because when he was having that game against the Giants, we talked about on the broadcast the fact that, you know, he's a pretty thick guy. I wonder if they wouldn't think about, especially with the injuries to Andrew Beck, maybe think about playing him at fullback. And then the next week, there he is. He's at fullback. And you're like, okay. What I loved about it was the fact that, you know, when you get in training camp, you hear NFL coaches talk, Drew, all the time. Well, it's competition. It's competition. It's competition. These guys can be battling for spots. They're going to be battling all the time. And then you see the 53-man roster, and you're like, that didn't mean squat because that guy had a terrible training camp. He's still on the team. What this proved, with British Brooks making the initial 53-man roster proved, is that the training camp does matter. It doesn't matter where you came from. I mean, all that talk was not just bluster. It was true. And British Brooks, you couldn't deny him. And I went back and I looked at my Harris hits. Like, when did I first start making, taking notice? And I started writing about him. I think it was like day 5, which was, I think, the first day in pads. Maybe it's day 2 in pads. I can't remember. But then it was like 3 or 4 days in a row. I'm like, British Brooks is doing some things. He's catching the ball well. He's had a couple of nice runs. And this is the nasty little secret in some sense to Harris hits. There's a lot of times I don't do a lot as it pertains to the running game because unless it really pops wide open.
Right.
Because guys are kind of tackling.
They're not tackling. They're not tackling all the way.
Yeah. So I kind of don't spend a ton of time, but British was really making his name kind of like, man, he's had a couple of nice runs. And then there was one day, I think it was maybe the second or third day in pads. And I remember British took a toss over to the left side. So it was on my side. And so I can see him looking up. And so he's got some room. And all of a sudden, Kalen Bullock, fellow rookie, comes over. And I know Kalen Bullock might look like a pipe cleaner, but he'll hit. He's physical. He's not scared. He's fearless. I knew there was going to be a collision. And all of a sudden, right in front of me, like directly in front of me, wham. I mean, those two hit. And Bullock kind of had to give a little bit because British put his shoulders down. And I thought, ooh, British has got a little something because there's some speed, some power. And it was then when I thought, man, is there something they can do with this guy? And then he just continued to get better and better. And that's why I love Drew, is that when D'Amico and Nick talked about the competition in camp, they weren't just blowing bluster. They were telling you, yeah, we value guys that come to compete. And if they compete and compete at a high level, they're going to be on this team.
So Brad, that's British Brooks. He's one end of the spectrum. He was not drafted, claws his way on, gets a roster spot. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, because you bring up Harris hits, and I gobbled those up, read every one of them, loved them. They're fantastic. Some days you'd have 38 notes about camp. Some days you'd have like 49. Yeah. It varied depending on basically how long the practice was and how physical the practice was. Without exception, every single day in practice, it seemed, whether I was reading Harris hits, whether I was checking Twitter, Derek Stingley Jr. on the other end of the spectrum, as far as guys who were he's 3rd overall pick in the draft. Derek Stingley Jr., it seemed like, had a pick at least once, twice per practice every single day, regardless of who the quarterback was. And I think we can all agree that's a good quarterback roster. If you look at the starting quarterback, who he is, pretty damn good. Pro Bowler, maybe an All-Pro, MVP candidate in C.J. Stroud. Backup in Davis Mills, who's got, 20-some starts under his belt, still young.
Yep.
He played a lot better, and you wrote about him a lot in Harris Hits on the good things he was doing. Case Keenum, he's played in the league since Moses was in short pants, has a lot of experience. And then Tim Boyle, he had some experience. Well, didn't matter. He was picking off each of those guys, spinning the wheel. It's got me super excited because I know it's going to be good for this defense, whether guys actually on other teams throw at him or they think, I can't go to that side of the field. Let's go this way. Where do you see that going for him? How much action do you think Derek Stingley is really going to get when he's in the game and they're lining up to throw? Do you think they stay away from him, or do you think they're going to challenge him from time to time? Where do you see that shaking out? Because dang it, John, he was making a play every single practice, if not 2, 3 times, 4 times a day.
Well, I think there are a couple things that come into play with this, Drew. Number one, what quarterback is on the other side? How bold is he? I think the other aspect that comes into it, right. The other part is, does Sting travel like he did in the playoff game? And that can get tricky against certain teams because, like the Dolphins, they'll take Tyreek Hill and they'll put him in the slot, and you think, okay, well, we'll travel our corner with him. And then he takes fly motion. He goes outside, and now he's back outside like he would have been. And maybe that's changed your whole coverage structure because of how that motion kind of plays into it. So, I mean, that's getting really technical. But I think the point is, with Sting, if he travels, then he's traveling more than likely against the number 1 wide receiver, more than likely. So do you want to completely avoid your number 1 wide receiver, or do you want to trust your number 1 wide receiver is maybe going to get open, and let's go against this guy? Now, Amari Cooper was also dealing with some foot issue or whatever the case might be. He was good enough to play that day, and so Sting just shut him down. And I think that's a good matchup for Sting, size-wise, physicality. Tyreek is not a great matchup for anybody, but I think that's the other part to consider is, does Sting travel and how much? Because if he does, then I think he will get challenged a little bit because it is the number 1 guy. And that quarterbacks are like, I can't go away from my number 1 guy.
Yeah.
I've got to go to that guy. But for example, the Bears. So we'll play the Bears week 2, right? So there's DJ Moore, there's Keenan Allen, there's Rome Odunze. They've got a pretty solid threesome. So which one do you take away? Which one does Sting travel with? Well, in that case, Caleb Williams has got 2 other options that he feels pretty confident going to. So you may travel Sting, you may not. But if you do travel and say, we're going to take Sting and put him on DJ Moore, well, now all of a sudden the Bears have other options to throw to. When you play the Vikings, if he travels with Justin Jefferson and Addison is not quite, he's still banged up, and there's no TJ Hawkinson because he went on PUP, now all of a sudden the Vikings might want to force it to Justin Jefferson because they don't have a lot of other options. Right. So I think it will vary from week to week. But if you do test him, you're going to pay. And I think even the offense found that out. I mean, in Ohio, there's a day in Ohio where he was in coverage on Nico Collins so beautifully. And it was really a lot like the interception he had against the Giants. He basically pinned the receiver to the sideline. The ball is thrown, and he knows he can go up and get it. Snatches it, great interception. And then as they did a 2-minute drill, out route the tank, and Sting knew it was coming. There's 2 things I've said about Sting. He's got tremendous football IQ. He's incredibly smart, and he's got the best hands on the team. And it was all right there. So you saw that in that practice, and I thought he just got better from that practice. It's been incredible.
You know what it reminded me of, his training camp? It reminded me of those early training camps, 12, 13, 14, 15, with J.J. Watt. And it reminded me of 14, 15 DeAndre Hopkins when he was catching everything on everybody. Working for the website way back when, we work for the Texans, but we do stuff on the website. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that have different hands, but Hopkins was just embarrassing defensive backs here in camp. He was catching everything, doing gymnastics with one hand, toe tapping, getting in. And there was one where he's basically like scoring a touchdown, and you see the defensive back who's covering him. And the guy had fine coverage. It's just, he's going against an alien. DeAndre Hopkins is an alien in a good way. Right. He was phenomenal. And word got back through some channels that the defensive back was saying, "Hey, why are you putting me on the front page of the website? Getting burned like that." It's like, hey, dude, nobody cares about you. We're focusing
Yeah.
on that guy, but
Right.
people have something. So it's just my point is what I just saw in training camp reminded me of what we saw when those guys were doing what they did, Watt,
Yeah.
Hopkins in training camp,
Mhm.
and it was just opening your eyes and just making you so danged impressed. I don't know if you felt the same way, you're jaded or what, but man, everything I read from you and everything I saw on the field, I was like, dang, this could be something. This could really be something.
Yeah, it's watching him is pretty special. And Mark will confirm this story. Back in 2019, if you remember back in 2019, we were winning games, but defensively we
There's
weren't
some
the
leaks
greatest.
there. There's some leaks.
Yeah, and especially in the secondary. And I remember walking in one day at the studio and I told Mark, I was like, man, if we had that kid Stingley from LSU, we'd be unstoppable. And I said that to him in 2019. He's like, "Well, he's a true freshman." I said, "Yeah, but he's special, man. That dude is incredible."
Now you
And he's
got
like,
him.
"Oh yeah, he kind of, whatever." And I kind of chuckled at it as well. But I was being truthful because I you could see it. You could see it as early as then. Now he ran into injury issues, and that of course is always going to be the question, like, oh, if he stays healthy, and that's the other thing too, Drew, is the fact that Sting doesn't just play the ball and play the pass. Like he comes up in the run game and is
Yeah.
physical and takes on running backs and is not afraid to hit and tackle. He is a really good force player from the outside on the run. So that I think also helps this defense is that you've got corners that'll come up and strike and make tackles, and Sting does that too. So, when you think about the best corners in the league, there are a few of them that's not part of their game. Now, Sauce does it. Sauce isn't afraid to be physical. And I know Sauce is the one that always he gets compared to, but I think this is the year where people step back and go, whoa, 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 wait a second. I mean, I've been saying it, so I'm not scared to say it again. I said it at, probably a week or two in a training camp that I thought he was going to be the best corner in the league when it was all said and done.
Yeah.
And I think we're moving in that particular direction. So, we'll see. I mean, look, he doesn't have to be, but he just has to be the Derek Stingley that we saw in training camp. And if he's that
Yeah. And
guy,
if you're having that discussion or that argument, things are going well for your team. It means
yeah, right.
you got a hell of a player. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
just what I saw, my goodness, it's what it reminded me of was Watt
That's
in those early days when you hear thump, thump, thump from him batting the ball down. It seemed like
yeah.
every third or fourth
Yeah.
pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pissing off the offensive coaches because they couldn't get anything done. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Needless to say, we're excited. I mean, when we do this next week, you and I are going to be previewing week 1 at the Colts. It's going to be a Donnybrook, man.
Yeah.
The way the season ended last year, we all remember that. That was fun, but that was a
Yep.
good Colts team that the Texans beat, and this is a good one they're going to have to beat on the road for that to happen. But dude, it's good to be back with you. I missed you, bro. So
Yeah, man, this is good.
virtual
This is
hug,
good.
through the
Yeah,
computer,
man,
and
there you go.
I
Yeah,
hope
what
you're
do they
great. And
how do they do it now with the
they do
heart
that
fingers
heart
and
thing.
all?
I
I
kind
don't
of
know.
like that. My little kids do it to me, and I
Yeah.
like that. It's endearing. So
Yeah.
thank
All
you,
right.
Jeremy Pena, for popularizing that. This has been Texans in the Lab.